Can't stop
off. Good afternoon and welcome to the Florida Lawyers Assistants Wellness Workshop 2023. Today will be 5 CLEs given at the end, and that includes 3.5 CLEs of mental health awareness, professionalism, ethics, bias elimination, and substance abuse. I'm going to let Dan McDermott welcome everybody aboard and really excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and greetings, everyone. I'm Dan McDermott, Executive Director of Florida Lawyers Assistants, and the entire FLA staff welcomes the hundreds who have joined us for FLA's annual workshop here this afternoon. I thank all of you for attending and especially want to thank our presenters who are graciously donating their time and talent today. And before getting underway with the program, let me just say a few words about FLA. Founded as an independent nonprofit organization in 1986, we are the resource for identifying and helping lawyers dealing with addiction and mental health concerns. For the past 37 years, our efforts have focused on education and outreach, evaluation, and support. By way of education and outreach, in this past year, for example, over 4,500 lawyers have attended our live presentations and CLE programs. As for support, we offer weekday noontime online support groups open to all, with separately focused groups for judges, lawyers, paralegals, law students, those dealing with depression and bipolar concerns, and for working mother lawyers. We also offer 30 additional weekly support groups for those under contract with FLA. Finally, we offer a monthly career counseling session with a veteran legal recruiter open to all who are contemplating a career move. So taken together, the support groups that I just described generate 3,500 live engagements every month, or more than 42,000 a year. If you're interested in learning more about any of them, please visit our website. You'll see it on some of the displays throughout the meeting. And we're also easy to find through Google. Just Google Florida Lawyers Assistants, and you'll get there and you'll find all the information you're interested in. We welcome your interest and your involvement. While many in the legal community connect with us entirely voluntarily, we also have the opportunity to work with lawyers referred from the Florida Bar and the Florida Board of Bar Examiners. Here, we offer another type of support. Through consistent interaction and performance validation, we provide guidance and serve as an early warning mechanism when appropriate. In that way, we become the resource that allows lawyers who need it to remain connected to their profession. So, as we move through this afternoon's program, we recognize a lot goes into lawyer well-being. You will hear experts discuss how to handle disruptive behavior, ways in which diet can improve mental clarity and energy levels. You'll hear some personal insights into meeting professional challenges. And you'll learn about the array of resources available to Florida lawyers. You'll hear how to apply business management practices to the practice of law. And finally, you'll hear one person's perspective on the powerful role that gratitude can play in our outlooks and lives. Well, speaking of, I'm grateful to have this afternoon with all of you. And I turn it back over to FLA's John Lesko, who will take it from here, John. All yours.
Okay, well, I don't want to spend too much time right now because we've got some great presentations lined up and Dr. Hemphill is already here waiting. I do want to mention thanks to everyone for being here. We have some very special thanks that we'll get to later. But attendees, you can ask questions today by typing into the Q&A. You can also chat to the hosts and panelists, not with other attendees. If you have a concern or a question, please feel free. Also, you should be able to raise your hand. So if you want to ask a question verbally, and you raise your hand, we will at the appropriate time enable you to speak, and we will hear your question verbally. Your names, your confidentiality has been protected today. Your names will not show up to other attendees. We, the panelists and hosts, can see your names, but it is not shared anywhere else. So with that, we're going to try to squeeze in a break at about 2 o'clock, I'm sure. Full bios and outlines and photos of all our presenters are online. If you go to the FLA website homepage, fla-lap.org, and scroll down the homepage, you can see the agenda and speakers' bios and some outlines. And with that, we'll turn this over. I am making one final note. Lewis is going to type into the a hyperlink into the chat box right now. At some point today, please copy that. The presenter at 3 p.m. wants people to have the handouts handy when he speaks. So thank you with that. And I give you Dr. Philip Hemphill. Dr. Hemphill's been a great friend and a great advocate and professional treatment provider for professionals suffering with mental health issues, stress-related disorders, all form of behavioral and substance addiction. And he's treated a lot of professionals, a lot of celebrities. He's written some books, and he's just a great guy. When we called Dr. Hemphill, he immediately agreed to be on here and had to do a lot of the pregame with us from places like London, because he's a medical director at a very successful treatment facility called All Points North, which has its home base in Colorado, but locations all around the United States and in London. So with that, Dr. Hemphill, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, John and Dan, for the invitation to be here today and to talk about the topic that is very important to professionals, to our society, to the organizations in which we're practicing, and most important to the individuals who may be experiencing difficulties and those who are affected by these difficulties. So I'm excited about being here and look forward to spending the next hour with you guys. So as a disclosure, as John said, I'm the Chief Clinical Officer at All Points North, private mental health and substance use treatment organization, and I'm also the principal at Hemphill Consulting. In general, the outline here will cover the definitions and overview of professionalism and disruptive behavior, and also look at how this impacts organizations and what individuals may be able to do to make corrective actions and to have a clear understanding of a path going forward. Obviously, this is all about perspective taking. You see that this presentation for me is informed by my 30+ years of clinical work with particular professionals over the course of my career, and the ways in which we have worked with them and been successful at returning people to practice their craft. Very few individuals that I've worked with over my career, we've had to make recommendations that we don't think that the individual is fit or should be able to continue. Most people may have some modifications with regards to their care that's needed, but ultimately, our goal is to return people to practice their craft. But ultimately, this particular talk is coming from my lens and my experiences, which may be quite different than a number of you. 10 years ago, a colleague and myself penned a book called Taming Disruptive Behavior. So, like John, his approach to life is let's just go right out the gate here of your conference and just have a whack right off the bat here with regards to something that's somewhat confrontive in nature. And you can see that just by the image here, the force that's used to understand this and also have some strategies for intervening. Need to first start off with what is professionalism. And this is really about mastering a complex body of knowledge and skills and being able to practice your craft. In this case, it's law. And also, use that knowledge in a way in which you're being creative in a sense of service of others. Ultimately, we're all guided by our code of conduct and our ethics and our competencies. And for example, you're receiving some CLEs just for attending this. So having a continual update to your experiences and what's new in the education world for your ability to practice your profession. Society really needs and wants professionals, and because there's a need to place trust in you and us as a professional entity, is really as a way of representing people in society, and having a very important, powerful role to help individuals and groups as it relates to the importance of being able to express individuals' needs and representation. Right out the bat here, I just want to tell you some of the things I've encountered in my career as to why professionals are usually not very responsive to treatment or evaluation. And most of it has to do with things that drive professionals. We're accustomed to being in control. So all of a sudden, when there's a referral for evaluation or monitoring or treatment, people don't like to sort of give up that control. We know just how to manipulate rules, and it doesn't mean that that's a negative or bad thing, as we're very familiar with the boundaries and the expectations of a professional identity and rules. So we know how to sort of have a sense of being able to monitor or just do enough or just do not sort of walk that fine line with regards to the rules. There's a certain amount of grandiosity that comes with being a professional. I mean, heck, a couple of hundred of you showed up here today to listen to what I have to say for the next hour. I mean, I got a kid upstairs, he won't even pick up his socks for me, so there's a certain amount of grandiosity that you experience as a professional. We're pretty masterful at using intellectualization as a primary defense, so we can generally explain things away pretty specifically and pretty confidently that we understand what's going on. We have a tendency to discount our needs and our feelings, and we don't really want to be exposed. So we want to keep things very private. And say, for example, the FLA is an organization where you may have a sense that these things are going to be exposed. We can always use the excuse that I'm just protecting others, I'm protecting the client, and these types of things. So these are just some of the areas that I've experienced in my career as to why there may be some difficulties when it comes time for a professional to pivot into the role of being an evaluee, a patient, a client, these different types of things. Part of this comes from the actual training, and there are some problems with this. Sometimes people are thrown very early into life into, having to make strong decisions based on other people and their future, their freedom, their financial situation. The expectation is that you have a lack of limits, you're always available. You really need to suppress your own emotions to deal, put the other person first here. Some people, as Dan aptly mentioned and John reinforced, is the power of working, and operating the business. Some people aren't really schooled in that particular area, so sometimes that can be a barrier in people's training. A lot of professionalism is not really wrought with, having balance. So the idea of how many, at the end of the month, how many billable hours, looking at the ranking that takes place in the firm, these types of things are part of the, the lack of balance sometimes that's expected in professional. There's an adversarial nature, so you can sort of develop a jaded perception of the world just by, the things you see If you're in a criminal court or if you're a judge or something like that, you may be exposed to things that actually could be traumatic and have an impact on you. But these are all the ways in which training can be a problem for professionals, including legal. So what happens? I mean, you're anointed because you're part of being the brightest of the bright, actually. And, you've gone through years of conditioning. You've learned volumes of information and studying and really sort of compromising a lot of your needs. And then you have this illusion that somehow you're above the ability to warrant that you can't be biased in your approach of your evaluation of yourself, or having feedback from others and saying, well, that's not really how it is. I'm not sure your perspective is actually correct here. So having this illusion that I understand what's happening, you don't really know what's going on with me. The perfect trainee is somebody who actually, these are, the obsessive compulsive traits actually get you through graduate school, law school, professional school. But if you do too much of this and it becomes problematic, you can see that it can easily be categorized and diagnosed from a mental health standpoint. So, having conscientiousness and being, wanting to do things and not really give tasks to other people, having some perfectionism. These seem like very positive, which they are, but doing too much of them can create problems. Constricting affect can be important in our work, but too much of it can lead us to sort of an inner world that's not really open to others. Having some sense of arrogance and having a sense of success and power is good, but too much of that, again, can spill over into narcissism. So, we are driven by external rewards, and we like esteem and privilege and status. There's nothing wrong with these things. They actually drive you and to be successful. We also have a drive to internal rewards, internal relationships, a legacy. If you think back, I can remember my professor, this professor, I can remember this early mentor that I had. Or this partner that I had that I really looked up to, these types of things. I mean, so the legacy of relationships are usually very important to professionals. Being goal-directed and these things, sense of responsibility. And these are, again, really positive attributes that professionals bring forward. I often see people sort of have this sense that somehow I'm not trying hard enough. And the message here is that somehow I don't really, my failure is because I'm lacking effort. And sometimes that's just not the case. Sometimes we actually need help. We actually need assistance. We need the care from others. We need the feedback from others. We're not always our best judge here. So, in professionals, there's these competing needs, your relationships, your family, your work, yourself. And sometimes people are really have poor preparation for balance. So, most people say, I didn't really know I had a problem until it was a problem. And so my goal here is to try to help you understand that there are usually signs and symptoms along the way that not only an individual, but an organization can understand how disruptive behavior can impact not only the individual, but the organization. And the reality is there's a lot of warning signs well ahead of time that not only the individual has to be responsible for, but an organization and even the profession of the legal profession has a responsibility to understand and intervene in these situations. And, to really date myself here, which I'm not as old as Confucius, but the reality is that, we really need to call things by their real name. So a lot of people like to say, well, this is a distraught professional, or this is a distressed professional, or they're just undergoing this transition in their life. I think we have to be realistic and say, no, this behavior is disruptive, and we need to work on moderating it. We need to work on people becoming less harsh or less extreme. That's it. That's what taming means. It means moderating, becoming less harsh or less extreme. It does not mean subjugating, repressing, subduing, or domesticating. That's what gets people fired up a lot of times. If you say you're going to try to make me into one of these, I'm not tolerating that. So, the definition here is inappropriate behavior that's confrontational, that's conflictual in nature that leads to abuse, or harassment. The individual sort of causes strong psychological or emotional distress in others and can adversely affect an organization. This stuff goes back in time related to the legal profession and how mitigation needs to take place in the workplace. So, obviously, these fall along the continuum of behaviors that cross the line. And, we often don't think electronically how these can cross the line, but I've seen these words leading to, sort of disruptive behavior that warrants attention and moderation and some intervention at times. When people start to use this language that sort of has a position or can impact others. This is an issue. We like to say, well, it's just the nature of the legal profession. Well, unfortunately, there's other people impacted by this. And, we see as much as 30% in the workplace in different types, verbal, physical, electronic, being disrespectful, yelling, insults, some physical abuse as well. So this behavior often goes underreported. And part of the issue is that a lot of organizations or a lot of individuals just sit there and take it. And they may say, well, I really didn't know how to go about reporting this. Who do I really go to? What is the history of our organization in responding to people who present with these types of behavior? So the organization can have a sense of learned helplessness. There's sometimes, overlooking individuals who may have this behavior. Well, they sort of don't get held accountable in this organization. There's a fear that if I'm sort of the whistleblower here, I'm going to be retaliated against. Maybe by that individuals or their cohorts that are loyal to them. And then again, the perceived inequality that it's not really policed equally across an organization. So a couple of my colleagues and I developed an instrument dealing with disruptive behavior in the workplace. And so these are some of the individual ways in which this behavior can be measured. Feeling like there's hidden meaning and threatening meaning in hidden remarks that seem to be benign, perceives that somebody's confronting them, that's really an attack on the person's character, and there's a need to quickly counterattack. Displaying the sense of haughtiness and entitlement, like the rules don't apply to me. Inappropriately blaming others for things. So these are just a few. And you think, well, man, that's a long list there. Well, I have another one, that just continues here. And so these are some other behaviors. And we used scientific method to validate this instrument and come up with a few areas that it actually measured. And it measured professionalism, direct disruptive behavior, and boundaries. So those are the three areas that we really were able to quantify when we looked at some of these specific behaviors that were measured. And the way this took place is that an individual rates themselves, and then there's peers that rate them, there's superiors that rate them, and there's subordinates that rate them. And we kind of come together and look at the actual impact from a 360-degree form of understanding behavior and the way in which it's impacting an organization. So, I've had people tell me, man, this isn't charm school here. People got to have tougher skin. We're dealing with freedom, confinement, life and death here. Who are you to sit on your high horse here and give us this lecture and really just sort of, say that this is what I need in the course of my healing. But there are serious risks here, and we've seen quite a bit of them. And then obviously in a legal standpoint, there's risks, but there's also regulatory and accreditation risk. And, public relations can be a nightmare. We see a lot of this today with the Me Too and the What's Up movement. There's morality at risk here. Obviously the impact on the clients and people around them. There's financial risk. People can be sued for this type of behavior. There's reputation from corporate and branding. And just I've seen people's careers be shattered over some of this behavior. So there's actual cost too. There's quantification where you can say, what really is the impact on this? Well, if you have people in an organization who have difficulty, working around certain individuals or groups of individuals, or they're a toxic culture in an organization, you have a high turnover. You have a loss of time as people are sort of trying to regulate themselves. You have people wanting to transfer internally. The focus of the work seems to be the quality can be diminished. So the focal point has to be part of the resources on containing this individual or this group of individuals, as opposed to being able to execute the mission and the expectations of the professional. You can have wage issues where, to bring a new employee in, to retrain them and to get them up to speed, that's it could be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars when you look at the impact on staff. And if you have other professionals actually leave, that's even more of a financial impact. And there are a number of other costs here. HR does, we have laws, and human resources does play a role in this. And it's actually, unacceptable for this workplace violence. So some of the language that HR, not that any of you need any help with language, but sometimes HR individuals could benefit from some leading words that help put disruptive behavior in its context and is not tolerated, and ways in which you can sort of use vernacular to help support interventions for people to put them on, say, a progressive discipline process. So, when behavior disrupts an organization, affects others' ability to get their work, creates a hostile environment, and interferes with people's ability to practice competently, then organizations can be actually held accountable for this behavior, not just the individual. Organizations have been sued and found accountable for not having interventions and strategies for individuals that may be causing this type of behavior. So sometimes we have to really go deeper into the individual and say, what's really going on here? Do we have a health problem going on? Do we have some form of physical, mental, substance use? What could potentially be going on here? So there's standards associated with being able to bring a person through this process. So, identifying and managing is part of the responsibility. And then in a reasonable way, trying to offer some form of solution and support and monitoring. So one of the ways in which we sort of triage things is we often will first look at, is there a health issue? So from the standpoint of health, is there some perhaps need for more of a thorough neurological evaluation? Or is there an aging process going on? Is there some potential, brain disorder that could be affecting a person's sensitivity or impulsivity or dysregulation of their affect or aggressive behavior or something like this? Then we sort of move on to issues related to medical and stress and psychiatric issues, and then potentially personality. So there's a little bit of a hierarchy that we kind of think about when we look at the possibility of understanding this. Now, these, looking at both substance and psychological issues, there's a lot of crossover as it relates to understanding these. So to diagnose these is somewhat challenging. So it may take time. It certainly takes certain types of professionals to really get to the root of these things, but it could be over the course of time. there's also a continuum of this. A person doesn't just fall on, well, they got the disruptive behavior shoes on, that therefore they're diagnosed with this disruptive behavior identity here. No, that's not how it goes. There's a continuum here. There's usually poly issues going on. It's usually not just A causing B. There's usually some combination here. People are generally pretty much in denial when they come forth, or there's a confrontation or an intervention. A lot of times you'll see very immature defense mechanisms. People sort of resorting back to primitive adolescent type responses when it comes to the actual defense mechanisms. Again, challenging to sort of be open to feedback. And there's actually an expense as it relates to treatment, because a lot of times there's a protracted intervention that's really required with individuals who may be experiencing this behavior. So this is a pretty typical case. We see people a little bit older, a little bit farther along in their career, usually high generators, producers, have a nice network of referral sources, public figures sometimes, involved in activities, perhaps even in the community that involve numerous staff members. They may have a specific conflict with one staff member, but then you really don't know because there's so much connection in the system. They may have some similar history, but they may have not been dealt with. Maybe there is a substance issue, but then there's been a way of avoiding this. Administration has had a difficult time because sometimes people rotate through authority positions in organizations, and there's not really administrators who have a longevity, so they can't really stay on the task here. And then, there could be familiar family engagement with the organization. So then there's a fear that, wow, if we really have an intervention on this individual, well, then it's going to really affect all the family members in this individual's life or their support network. And maybe there are some recent stressors. So you can see how complex a typical case is. It's usually not A causing B. It's usually multiple factors here. So, looking at what type of intervention is best here, you always go to sort of your bylaws and what are the expectations in an organization, or, the bar, or in this case, the Florida Lawyer and Judge Assistant Program here. What are the actual strategies and bylaws that have to be going through here. I mentioned assessment. You could have assessment and just structured monitoring of people to sort of track people a little while and see how things go. Maybe there's a need for some supportive or maybe some deeper psychological therapy that may need to go on, or some real professionals focused therapy. That's another form of an intervention. There may need to be a period of time where there's a different level of the interventions, maybe a residential, maybe a partial hospitalization, maybe an intensive outpatient, maybe a telehealth program, these types of things, maybe just an outpatient program. Groups, maybe the 12-step program, maybe some support system programs that are available, or maybe just coaching and some informal meetings from mentors in the organization, so in the legal profession. So there are many different types of interventions that sort of get potentially thrown out there. I mentioned at the beginning that some people may be recommended to retire from practice, or suspension or revocation of their capacity to practice. Some of this came from my book related to a lot of healthcare. So, sometimes, on the front end, in the orientation, not that the legal profession doesn't have this throughout their training, but just an expectation that you'll be working in teams that involve self and others, be respectful, maybe have some educational expectations and some examples of desirable behavior and potential sort of mediation strategies that can be used. Also, educate people on what are the incident report processes and how those go about and how they get handled in an organization. The model here of identifying this hazardous behavior, looking at the risk to the organization, controlling the risk, and then monitor and reevaluating and continually reviewing. Don't stop and say, well, we had this one intervention, it's a one-hit wonder. That's not how things work. There needs to be an ongoing assessment here. So from a leadership standpoint, leaders, the expectation here is to continually evaluate the culture of safety and quality, prioritize this, implement change when necessary. All individuals in the organization have an opportunity to report quality and safety concerns, have a clear communicated code of ethics and conduct, create this process of managing. If you have someone that sort of goes off the rails and needs an intervention, here's a very clear way that we deal with this. Provide these educational programs focused on safety. Use teams, do team building activity, use teams. Openly discuss. Don't try to hide these things. Continually distribute data and literature about stress management, wellness, and caring and professionalism. What I've seen some leaders do that has been problematic is they just kind of hope the problem will go away. They have a difficult time taking the first step. They try to say, that there are others that are disruptive. It's not the individual. They sometimes will say that, actually, when we were doing research to write our book, we had to show the publisher what's out there. And we came across a book called The No Asshole Rule. And we said, well, we're a little more professional, so we like to have a more professional approach to this instead of using a pejorative language there and say, oh, this guy or this woman, they're just an asshole. That's really not should be in the vernacular of describing this behavior. Don't give special treatment. I've seen leadership do that. Trying to conceal this from a board. That's not a good idea either. Another one that's really very common, and it's actually, I've seen it firsthand as a consultant myself, is let's bring in some external consultants to deal with this whole matter. And then they'll take care of it. I don't have to really report it or have to deal with it myself. And then, somehow some people think, well, this is just how it's going to be. It's never going to change. That's not true either. This behavior can be managed and treated, and individuals do change with interventions. As leaders, physician leaders, and leaders in the legal profession, maintaining a high standard here is expected, and making sure that understanding the larger system of legal here, looking at cross-functional efforts and demonstrating effective communication skills. These are expectations of a specific leader, the competencies. There's also disruptions on boards. I've seen this as well. So some people like to control the agenda. Some people sort of have, they're present, but they're not really present. They suffer presenteeism. Some people get bored. You start listening to them, and they just go on and on. They say the same old thing. Some people are only invested in the past. So these are all subtle ways that disruption can take place, even on a board. So if you're on a board, you need to be prepared ahead of time. You need to make sure you're listening and contribute. You need to sort of have boundaries and not really share these things outside of the board. Recognize your conflicts of interest and disagree appropriately with the interest, but not necessarily the person. Take responsibility. I've seen a number of executives, their career be bogged down and they're sort of thinking too much. Their processes, they get caught up in that. They react too arrogantly. Sometimes things are too complex and it's overwhelming. They lack a strategic perspective on different levels, different layers. They may not honor boundaries or display empathy or sensitivity. So I think a nice way of sort of starting to manage this whole concept that I'm talking about here is have a system where there's coaching. What are your blind spots? Who are your confidants that you can go to, and they can be honest with you? What are some safeguards? Who are some safe people you can turn to? And have time where you're having deliberate reflection. There's parts of your brain that will get reinforced just by taking a 2 to 3 minute break and actually moving around, whether you're doing calisthenics at your desk, standing up, walk around the office. If you're not in the office, which some people aren't, go outside to the mailbox, walk around the house or whatever. 2 to 3 minutes on the hour. You know, we get these notifications from these watches. There's science behind that. So that's an opportunity to have some deliberate reflection on a routine basis. These are all the processes in our multi-source feedback, our 360 model, where you're looking at all the ways in which you can measure and have really positive outcomes from this type of feedback. One of my colleagues a few years back just talked about civility, Marty Kaufman, and talked about Michael Kaufman, excuse me, how, you know, we need to really just have more decor and politeness and, you know, recognize that it is hard work to stay present when we're dealing with some of these difficulties. And, you know, just the concepts and values of respect and humility in that when we do give feedback or taking an approach of, I want to learn, you know, cultural humility is about, I don't know everything about your situation, about your circumstances, about your culture, about your present functioning. Please teach me about it. That's what humility is. Having more self-awareness and understanding about what are some barriers to that awareness, working on communication and listening, being a good listener, an active listener, yet discriminating reviewer, and giving people praise as well. Professionals sometimes have a difficult time offering praise. So who manages this issue? You know, there's a little story about 4 people named everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. There was an important job to get done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody thought anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought that anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. So that's the concept of taking that first step. And, you know, some of that first step is not seeking emotional support from our clients. When in doubt about self-disclosure, don't. Be careful of personal services. Sometimes you have to bring in witnesses or leave your door open. Be cautious with gifts and forgiving fees. Touch, be cautious with touch. Be willing to write down whatever it is you're doing. And, you know, is that something you would write down? Is that behavior something you would write down? Be, you know, cautious of making exceptions and recognize vulnerability. I think more importantly, as a professional, is really getting in touch with these questions. You know, what is that really makes you smile? And today's a great example of taking a deep breath and thinking about, what are your favorite things to do? What activities do you do that actually you lose track of time? And, you know, what are things that make you really feel great about yourself? Not just good, but great. Who are the people or the experiences that inspire you? You know, what are those? Getting back in touch with those, reaching out maybe to some of those individuals you know. What are you just naturally good at? Think about that for a minute. Are the things that you really need help with? And who can you reach out to? Who can, you know, if you had to teach something, what would it be? Because all of you have something to teach others. You know, you don't necessarily want to live a life of regret, but you also want to examine, you know, sort of, what am I doing? What am I being? What have I done in my life? What are some possibilities? What do I want to keep doing? What do I want to stop doing? What do I want to start doing? So what do I want to keep doing, stop doing, and what's something new I want to start doing? You know, you only really have to move the needle at the beginning, 1%, to have a profound change, you know, 2-3 months later. Habits take about 66 days to form. So starting off small is really important. And, it's really important to act now. It's important to also think about in others, catching them doing something good, not always just thinking, well, they're disruptive. This person's always this way or always that way. People don't end up in the bucket just in one area. They have the capacity, and it's very valuable to actually acknowledge and support people and help them doing something good. I showed you a picture, and if you look behind me, there's a cover of the book on the wall there of the fist coming through the book. And that was actually our cover in 2013, but the reprint actually changed it and put it more into some dominoes here as a recognition that there are a number of factors that people sort of go through during this falling down process. And can we interrupt that so that it doesn't continue to impact others, not only individuals, but themselves, their environment and those around them. So can we do something more preventive here? And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen, and there's a way to get in contact with me and turn it back over to John or Dan or whoever else has the mic where we can potentially ask a few questions.
So the floor is open for some questions. We'll be looking at the chat and the Q&A. And if anyone wants to raise a hand and get verbal ability to ask, that's fine too. Dr. Hemphill, we have a comment, just excellent. Dr. Hemphill, thank you. That was really eye-opening. And I kept thinking during your presentation that with all these behaviors you described that are not very flattering to a person, they're all kind of bad behaviors, and we see bad behavior every day, and wondering how indicative that is of real serious characterological disorders, problems. What do you find when you treat people and get to the base person who's a professional, a lawyer?
Yeah, I think, we all have difficult days. We go through difficult times in the course of our career, our life. We all are experiencing a life cycle as a professional. You're not immune to the life cycle as it exists out there. So, some of the things is to just try to understand, go into a situation, a conversation, a coaching opportunity, a disciplinary opportunity, sort of as with somewhat of an olive branch. Hey, let me know what's going on. Help me understand what's happening here with regards to what's going on with you. If there's a slight pattern, this is out of character for you. Or, we've noticed this since you've had this. Like, try to start to connect things, to put things together, and sort of approach the individual first to try to understand. There are some common areas. I mentioned quite a few of them with regards to areas that we look for. Individuals who sort of have this tendency to do things by themselves and not work collaboratively with others, who may sort of have this sense that I'm above others. I'm not really putting value into supporting others or letting them support me in this situation. So those are some of the ways, like people who want to sort of isolate, they sometimes can have a bit of paranoia about other people trying to infringe upon their professionalism or their boundaries or their career or their workplace environment. So those are some areas that can be of concern. And then obviously you want to screen for substance use if it's out of character to see if that's a contributing factor to a person. So those are some of the quick observations that you might want to have initially. Okay.
We've got a couple good questions in here. I'd like to read you, Dr. Hemphill, just one second. Okay, we got some very nice comments. Thank you for people who are willing to reach out and let us know what you're thinking. Where did you get the information that you form a habit in 66 days? I have heard it takes 21 days. Any resources to which you could point us?
Yeah, so that is a general statement. for really solidifying change. There are small things that you can start and you'll see progress in the short run within 20 days or so. But that citation is the British Journal of Medicine from 2007 that talked about habit forming and different types of activities and it really being solidified at about the 2-month mark. You'll see progress. You'll actually experience disillusionment and frustration in the process of change. That's why I was encouraging the idea of 1%. Makes very small changes at first, because say you want to, do something like go to the gym. Well, that requires a lot of different effort. So you have to make a number of changes in your life to really get to comfortable to going to the gym, or even just swimming or something like that, or increasing your walking time. Just start very small, 1-2% change, and it leads in 60 days to a massive change that takes place. Let me tell you give you a quick example. Let's say you say, oh, I'm going to have this little mint at the end of the day, once a day. So that's a 1% change. And, 60 days, how many pounds of chocolate have you eaten if you've had that one, mint every day at the end of the day? You've really, it accumulates quite a bit. So very small amounts of change can accumulate at that point. So that's from the British Journal of Medicine in 2007.
Okay. I have a couple questions in here related to dealing with difficult colleagues, angry colleagues. Any tips, suggestions how you deal with an employee or a partner who gets offended, take things personally, and one person referred to it as the rage partner?
Yeah, this is really good and very difficult, because we can all benefit from doing this throughout the spectrum of our lives, whether it's professional or personal. One thing people can't really argue with is what you're experiencing and what you're feeling. So when you say to someone, you are doing this, or you did this, or this is how you behave, and you immediately put the person on the defensive. But if you can approach an individual and talk about, I'm really worried, I'm really concerned, I'm really cautious about how I approach you with this. My experience with you in the past week, my experience yesterday, my experience earlier today has been what I'm feeling in this moment is my heart is racing. I'm a little anxious just talking to you about this, John, So like if I can talk about myself first and then move into trying to give the person some understanding and some feedback about the way in which I perceive that experience, what I witnessed in others in that scenario. Now, a clear sign is if the person dismisses you and they're lacking an empathetic response, or they totally maybe get angry at you, then you're going to realize, hey, this is not really a safe environment for me to approach a person like this. So you may have to sort of get to a place where you have others that come in, like an intervention type strategy with people. You do it when there's safe people in the room. Or it may be a situation where you have to go up to authorities in your organization and get support from them and let them sort of help with the intervention and mediate the process. So we start with ourselves. We approach the situation. We say, this is what we experience. They may say, well, that's your problem. Well, then you say, oh, I'm a little concerned about going any farther if this is how the person reacts to me. So, we start with ourselves. We give some feedback about how we're feeling. The person really can't argue that. If they start to, then that's not necessarily a safe situation. You may have to try an alternative approach.
I'm sorry, Dr. Hemphill. I was just taking a note because we have some skilled clinicians on the FLA team. And if we could develop a group, I would love to periodically have a module on I feel, that communication skill is just priceless, and it can be taught in a very short time, like you just offered. So thank you. What we have
Can I offer one more thing real quick? Because if you just use that ABC model as well, like, so you have a situation, an activating event, and very often we'll go to the behavior. Like, I'm paralyzed, somebody's, really upset in the room, they're hollering at somebody else, or there's hit their hand on the desk or whatever. We can try to slow this down by thinking about what are we telling ourselves, the belief. So we have the event and the response, but what is in between is the B, the belief that we have about the current situation, and try to slow that down and communicate that.
Well, I'm going to ask a couple more questions here, Doc. This is great news. People were engaged because we could ask questions to you for the next hour or two. But secondhand trauma, especially, and we've dealt with this here, people, they're having nightmares. A gentleman who called and said, if I see one more 4-year-old's brains on the walls, I'm going to kill myself. He did capital murder cases. He was exposed to that kind of thing all the time. And we had a question in the chat about dealing with the secondhand trauma, compassion fatigue, that type of thing. Any tips?
Yeah, professionals, unfortunately, we're exposed to things in society that the normal population isn't, despite people thinking, well, I can just look at all the videos I want on the internet, and that's the same. It is not the same when you're in a professional role and you're representing someone, or you're trying to help someone, or you're witnessing these things firsthand, if you're in the medical profession or something like that, or if you're a judge and you have to look at all the pictures, or you're a prosecutor, like the example you just gave, John. So vicarious traumatization is a real thing. The same PTSD and complex PTSD symptoms hold true, where people can have flashbacks, they can have hypervigilance, they can have this idea of hyperarousability. They themselves may be short with others. They may have sleep disturbances. There's all these symptoms that go along with vicarious traumatization that actually is qualified for post-traumatic stress. And, what I would say, unfortunately, as a professional, you are a receptacle and a repository to some of society's ails. And that's the pain of being a professional. Now, most people aren't prepared in the early stages of their education and training to be able to deal with these things, that it comes over time, that you harden up your shell and you can deal with these things. And then you go back out in the world and you can't really talk about this with other people. So hopefully you have colleagues that you can share these types of things with, because, I aptly say my wife's in the medical field. I've been practicing for 33 years. She still doesn't know what I do for a living, because I can't really come home and give her all the details of things, because this is really what I've signed up for. And these are the things I have to sort of deal with. And so I have to, manage this through stress management, through boundaries, through doing positive things, as I said at the end there. I have to use the skills that I teach each and every day. But if need be, you may need professional intervention to deal with complex trauma.
Excellent. Well, and we've seen it, and that was a great explanation, Dr. Hemphill. Thank you. I have to address one more question because it's a little different, and it talks about ethnicity and cultural backgrounds and biases, particularly some people being more isolationist by culture.
Yeah, we can never fully understand everybody's culture, everybody's upbringing, everybody's experiences throughout the course of the continuum of their life. So as I mentioned earlier, practicing cultural humility is the first step. Even you look at, as you just mentioned, geographically, Florida has tons of places that are very remote and they're not urban at all. So even understanding the morality, the character, the expectations in that, culture is very important, and we have to take a sense of humility to that. Now, we can never fully understand the individuals we're working with, the people we're representing, the people we bring into our employment, that are our colleagues. We cannot fully understand that. So constantly approaching it that way is really just the first step in the absolute minimum we should do, much less write policies and procedures that are inclusive of individuals.